Welcome to the 48th episode of the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, I'm going to do a little solo episode talking about judgment, patience, and how we can get along with others. This is a quick talk that I give different versions of in different classes from time to time. And with Thanksgiving quickly approaching, I thought maybe it would be a good time for it, particularly since we've just gotten through a contentious election, which oddly enough is still not entirely settled. And so knowing that we may have some family members getting together, maybe in person, maybe by Zoom, given the pandemic and the rest, but Thanksgiving always seems to be a time when we get together with others in hopes of being thankful, getting along, sharing quality time. But I think if we're being honest, we've all had at least one Thanksgiving where things got a little weird because of how friends or family members speak to one another. Now, if you're a teacher, a student, a parent, really, if you work with other people at all, then you know that these are regular problems, right? That all the time we find ourselves losing patience with others, passing judgment on others, having trouble maintaining healthy relationships or even working relationships just because we don't think other people are doing the right thing or trying. So I'm going to use myself as a little bit of a case study here because I regularly hear from students, especially say after a rougher class, sometimes I'll have students say, how did you not yell? How did you stay patient through that? How do you let that kid say that to you and not freak out? And I kind of laugh because if they knew me when I was younger, that probably wouldn't have been the case. I got in a lot of, not bad fights, but I got in a lot of fights through elementary and middle school, even in the beginning of high school. I don't think I've been in a real fight since about 10th grade, though I've been pretty close a few times. And I think what's really funny is that my patience has grown exponentially, and my willingness to tolerate what we might generously call shenanigans from other people has increased exponentially. I really did not have a lot of tolerance for people saying or doing what I believed to be stupid things when I was younger. And now I find myself regularly trying to, explain away or find a way to improve that person's outlook. And I think that's important. As a teacher, one of our jobs is to help people get better. I think that's one of the primary functions of education, to not just uplift an individual, but to empower them to become the best version of themselves. However, we have to remember that it's up to the individual to decide what kind of person he or she wants to be. And so sometimes we have to be patient because it takes a long time to make those improvements, to see someone actually develop and grow. Sometimes, as a teacher, you say, well, I'm not getting the results I want in my class. This kid just isn't getting it. They're never going to. And that's probably an unfair way to look at it. It's probably counterproductive. You have to assume that maybe at some point that kid will get it. It just might not be in your class. I know a lot of people who struggled through high school or didn't care through high school and then became very serious students later on, maybe in college. I know some people that have never been serious students but turn into very serious workers, or they run their own companies later on and they do very well. So I think we have to remember that, there's a lot of different ways to be good, and there's a lot of different ways to be cool, and there are a lot of different ways to get along with people who maybe we have individual disagreements with. And maybe to help encapsulate some of this, I'm going to read a little section from the Great Gatsby. Now, The Great Gatsby is, it's a great book. I read it in high school and I did not love it. I thought, that guy's a good writer, but that book sucked. And I read it in college and I thought, okay, that's really good. And I think at that point it's because I had met some actual wealthy people and realized people like that actually exist. In high school, I don't think I had that frame of reference. But it wasn't until I was a teacher that I really came to appreciate the book. And what I'm going to read is actually the first page, depending on the printing you have, first page and a half, 2 pages. And it's fantastic because it has nothing to do with the plot of the story. It's just characterization of the narrator, of Nick Carraway. And I think that there's some pieces of this that all teachers should try to internalize. And really, all people who are trying to get along with others, all people who regularly work with other people where they maybe have disagreements, this is really, really important. And I think that this is something that I sort of accidentally started to do in my own life. And it's one of the reasons that this book resonated with me later on, because now I see myself in some of these lines. So I'm just going to read a little bit here, and then we'll talk about how this can help to inform our relationships with others, whether it's coworkers, family members, students, peers, etc. All right, so the beginning of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Chapter 1. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me, and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person, and so it came about that in college I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently, I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and are marred by obvious suppressions. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I am still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. And, after boasting this way of my tolerance, I come to the admission that it has a limit. Now, there's a lot of great stuff in there, but there's one line that for me encapsulates the way a teacher should view students and maybe the way we all should view each other. This is certainly important if you're a parent and how you think about your children, but this is probably good for your friends and other family members as well. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. What that means is that as long as you are hopeful that a person is good or that they will become better, you do not judge them. It's why it's important to say things like, you are acting like an idiot, not you are an idiot. Now, probably a nicer way to say that altogether, but think about it. If you are acting like an idiot, it doesn't mean that you are one. That's not your state of existence. That was a temporary lapse in your behavior. You are acting like a thing means this is a simile, right? I'm making a comparison. But if I say you are an idiot, I have passed judgment. I've shut the door. That's who you are to me. That's who you are in my eyes. As a teacher, when you're thinking about how to get along with your students, or when you are sitting at your Thanksgiving table and you hear your crazy uncle or weirdo cousin spout off something strange, remember that reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. If you believe that that person is valuable, that person is important, and you want that person to either get better in the world or be a more full and productive part of your life or the community, then you cannot pass judgment. It's too easy to just say, well, that person's an idiot, whatever. If we went around telling everyone that they're idiots all the time, or fill in whatever negative word you like here, don't be a jerk, we wouldn't really have very many relationships at all. And I think right now, this is a talk that's more important than ever because we've just gotten through this very contentious election where, we've seen an unfortunate number of people posting things on social media like, well, if you didn't vote for so-and-so, unfriend me now. I don't need that in my life. Don't talk to me if you voted for so-and-so. That's insane. Okay, now, if the person displays a wide range of personal or moral or political views you disagree with, then that's fine. Don't be friends with the person. But you also don't need to make it about an election, right? Who a person votes for is very little indication of the other things going on in their lives. Some of the people who I think are literally some of the best people I know, the kindest, the most charitable, the most generous people I know, they would, literally give you the shirt off of their back. Not just the cliche phrase, they would literally give you their shirt. They voted for the other guy, not the person I voted for. Why on earth would I shut the door on someone who I know both to be a good friend and a good person because they held a different political view? Now, I'm not justifying the 10 or 20 or 50 other things that person might believe that may have led to that vote. But the idea that if you don't agree with me on this one thing, well, we just can't be friends anymore. That's terrible. There are thousands of people in the United States this year who are not going to get to celebrate Thanksgiving with their family out of fear of a pandemic. And that it's terrible, but reasonable, right? We're trying to make a little bit of a sacrifice for a greater good, trying to protect ourselves, etc. But there are also thousands of people who are not going to celebrate Thanksgiving with friends or family this year because they're unhappy about someone else's political views, or that person said something a few months ago and we just can't bring ourselves to forgive it. Let it go. Okay? Preserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I need to be infinitely hopeful that crazy cousin is going to get it together, right? They're going to be friendly. They're going to learn to see things in a more clear, objective, and moral way, from my subjective viewpoint. They might be thinking the same thing about me. But if we can all remember that we should be hopeful about those we care about. It helps us to avoid passing judgment. It helps us to avoid shutting the door and saying, well, that's just who that person is. Because as soon as you label that person, as soon as you categorize them in your mind, then that's usually it. This is why people say, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Well, that's true. But if you're the person who the impression was being made upon, if I meet you and you make a bad impression, you're actually probably going to be in pretty good shape with me because I don't judge you by it. Yes, I do form some guesses and quick opinions, but I don't assume that I've seen all of you or that that's all there is to know. I'm hopeful that I caught you on a bad day, or you were in a weird mood, or maybe the introduction was strange. Maybe I said something strange that set up whatever it is you said or did that I didn't like. I am hopeful that that was a miscommunication or a temporary lapse, not a permanent demonstration of your character. Teachers, when a student misbehaves in your class, you should remember that behavior is a form of communication. If that kid's acting tired, bored, whatever, maybe they're communicating they've had problems at home the night before. Maybe they're communicating that they're not understanding what you're teaching. Maybe they're communicating that they're upset with something else going on in their lives and that paying attention in your class at that moment is not a high priority. Are you going to take that personally? You teach over 100 kids each year, and a kid comes in, has a couple bad days, and you're going to say, oh, that's it. You're dead to me? Like, if that's your view on this, I'm going to be honest, you probably shouldn't be a teacher. Now, I say probably because I'm infinitely hopeful that you could get over that. But if a kid says something offensive, a student in class says something mean or rude, they interrupt, they call you a name, you can't do anything with that. You got to take a deep breath, let it go, right? Remember that you set the tone for the class. And if you want everyone to maintain hope, if you want everyone to be open-minded, then you have to do it first. If a kid says something rude to the teacher, you have to consider that in that setting, that kid probably would have said it to just about any other teacher, right? They're probably yelling at your job, not yelling at you as a person. Police officers have to do this all the time. They have to remind themselves that when somebody mouths off, they're mouthing off at the badge. They're not mouthing off at me as a person, unless I take it personally. If I respond personally and I start getting into it, well, now it is person to person. But in most cases, that was an upset person yelling at your job. As a teacher, somebody wants to yell at your job, let them yell, right? Calm them down, step outside, do what you got to do. But you calm that situation down and you don't pass judgment on those individual occurrences because that does not help build healthy relationships. It does not create an atmosphere, an environment that promotes the growth you're hoping for, right? We're hopeful for growth. Whether it's fast or slow, we want it to happen. And as soon as I shut the door by passing a judgment, particularly a negative one, then I've made that growth almost impossible. Now, that goes a little differently at the Thanksgiving table, right? If somebody starts mouthing off and says something disrespectful to grandma, then, at that point, they're probably not yelling at any grandma. That's probably already a personal situation. However, before we tell that person that they're the worst ever and they're out of the family and the rest, stop, take a deep breath and think, do you still have hope for that person? Do you still believe they can be good and will be better? Can you remember a time that you thought they were great? What happened between that time and now? Right? There's a lot of things that can happen that make it difficult for us to understand how a person changes or why people say the things they do, but it's important for us to try. Okay, I actually am going to quote something or paraphrase something I've seen floating around the internet for a few years now. And I'll be honest, I mostly hate it just because of the way it's phrased. I feel like it's kind of a fluffy cliche, but the idea is a good one. You be nice to everyone or be kind. You don't know all the battles someone else is fighting. I don't know. Something about it just strikes me as cheesy, but the idea is a great one, right? That you don't know all the other things going on in that person's life. And so if they say something to you that sits the wrong way and you snap back, are you yelling at that person or are you yelling at that person because they've responded to some other situation poorly? Consider that person might have had a problem at home that morning. They might have had a problem at work that afternoon. You might be sitting at the Thanksgiving table and not know that someone in your family just had a bad day at work the day before and they brought some of that with them. They might not be behaving poorly at Thanksgiving so much as they're reacting poorly to something happened before, and it just took a little time. Right? Now, I'm not trying to excuse bad behavior, and I'm not saying you can't put someone in their place or try to get somebody to recognize what they've done. I'm just saying that the idea of passing judgment is a dangerous one because it means we close a door. And when we close a door, we've given up hope. It means I'm done with you. What about the rest of this? Think about, let's go back to the election idea. Think about when somebody says, if you voted for so-and-so, unfriend me. I'm done with you. I don't need friends like that. Now, maybe there's good reason for that sometimes. You say, well, this person is a literal fascist, or this person has been posting sexist and racist things on social media for 2 months and I can't deal with it anymore. Hey, that's fine. I mean, that's your prerogative. I would also suggest that before you do it, if you actually cared about that person in the first place, you should probably reach out. Just ask, have the conversation. Hey, what's going on? Why do you keep posting that stuff? Worst case scenario, they're going to say, well, because I believe it and it's real and whatever. But now you know for sure. You might find out, they're sloppy with a share button. You might think they thought it was funny and didn't realize it wasn't. Who knows? Again, I'm not excusing sexism or racism. I'm just saying that before you shut out someone that you previously cared about, you should ask, be an adult and have the conversation, right? And if you didn't care enough to have the conversation anyway, you probably shouldn't have been friends with that person in the first place, right? Who cares at that point? You don't need to make a post about it and say, oh, unfriend me. No one cares, right? Just take them off your friend list. But what do we do? What happens if someone really does hold, say, one of those beliefs that we find absolutely detestable, that is both harmful to your relationship with the person, but maybe is harmful to a lot of other people? Well, you can shut off and unfriend and be done. But remember, that means that you've given up. You are no longer hopeful. You think that person is beyond repair. Because if you thought that person had a glimmer of hope left and you could talk them through it, or you could offer some ideas, share an article, have a conversation, whatever it may be, then you don't unfriend. You don't disinvite that person from the next party or the next family event because you're hopeful they can get better. Okay. Now, I'm not saying, maybe sometimes you take a break. That's okay. But taking a break isn't shutting the door. It's just closing it over for a little bit and trying to tone down the noise. So what happens? Well, again, I think you got to be careful because it's difficult to judge someone for their political beliefs because there's a lot of ways that people can arrive at them. You have to have the conversation. You need to understand the context. We can't assume that bad behavior is just bad behavior. It's usually a symptom of something else. And we need to ask those questions. Okay. Now I'm going to give an example, and this may feel a little strange. This feels like a tangent, but I promise it'll connect. Think about all the ways that we judge, not just our friends and family members, but think about maybe how in the last couple of years we've started to judge historical figures for their behaviors based on modern standards. Okay. We're going to judge, Abraham Lincoln for being racist against American Indians, or Thomas Jefferson for his racism and owning slaves. Geez, who else? I mean, there's not Martin Luther King for being homophobic. I mean, it just goes on, right? And it's not to excuse any of those behaviors today, but I think we have to remember that we're judging that person out of their context, and judging someone out of their context holds them to a standard that would be unreasonable, right? You don't know what will be deemed right or wrong 100 years from now. And so how are you going to sort of prepare yourself for that? How are you going to protect your legacy and your life's work? You're not. You're going to do the best you can to be a good person today. And we're all just crossing our fingers and hoping that that's good enough. But there's something right now that almost all of us do that is almost certainly going to be viewed as detestable. Okay? Right now, if you're listening to this, there is, probably about a 95% chance, 95% chance that you regularly engage in behaviors that are fully detestable already. We just don't realize it or think about it that way. And if things continue on and we continue to judge people the way we are at the moment, then, within the next 100 or 200 years, all of us will look like horrible, horrible people. You know what it is? It's eating meat. It's buying leather, right? We use animals as tools. We use them for food. We use them for materials, and we don't think twice about it. CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. I mean, these are massive, thousands of acres, and they pile animals in as tight as can be. The animals stand in their own feces. They're force-fed, unhealthy, unnatural foods. They're given corn instead of grasses. I mean, all this stuff. They're not eating what is best for them. They're being pumped full of antibiotics and other drugs to prevent illness. They're standing in their own waste. It's disgusting. It's awful, right? But I bet we all still enjoy a cheap cheeseburger sometimes, right? We want to buy a leather belt or a pair of shoes, and we don't want it to cost a crazy amount of money, so we get it from cheap sources. Okay, that is almost certainly going to be judged in the same way that we are judging, any number of people from the past at this point, right? Now, why? Because we already know it's wrong. We have tons of research that says that most animals, most of the farm animals we keep, they have thoughts, they have feelings. It is not uncommon to put sows after they're separated from the baby pigs. They're put on antidepressants. They're put in cages so that they can't move. All they have to do is lay there and milk and feed the babies. And then they're forcefully separated so that the mother can turn around and have more babies. I mean, it's a horrible practice. If these animals didn't have thoughts and feelings, you wouldn't put them on antidepressants. You know why we do that? Because we know they're depressed, and we know that they don't have as many children or produce as much milk when they're depressed. This happens to cows. This happens to pigs. All the animals on your farm are given all kinds of drugs, whether psychotropic or antibiotic, to make sure that they stay functional for the purposes we use them for. And it's disgusting. Now, I say that as a person who is probably going to eat some beef for dinner tonight. I know it's bad, and that actually makes me worse, right? Because I've thought this through, and I continue to engage in the behavior. If in 100 years, 200 years, somebody by some random chance hears this podcast, they're going to say, well, he's one of the worst ones because he knew what he was doing, and they're right. Okay, but now turn that around and think about some of those other characters that from history we've just talked about. Abraham Lincoln or Thomas Jefferson or Aristotle, cancel Aristotle. He defended slavery. Take your pick. Are we going to throw away every great thinker, every influential person from our history because they did something wrong by our standards? Like, we should acknowledge they did it wrong, but we need to also extend a little grace and say, well, in that time period, maybe we can be hopeful that there were other pressures they were facing, or maybe that their social priorities, the ethics of the time, made that behavior acceptable, even if they knew it was repugnant. Like, Thomas Jefferson was opposed to slavery. He tried to end slavery. He tried to abolish slavery. But he never got rid of his own slaves, right? You know why? Well, he was under economic pressure. I mean, the guy spent most of his adult life on the verge of bankruptcy, sort of living the high life, but not letting everybody know that at any moment it could slip away. He couldn't free his slaves unless everyone else freed their slaves too, because of what it would have done to the profit margins, to the costs of the things produced on his plantation. That doesn't excuse any of it. I mean, an economic excuse is a terrible excuse, except it happens. Right? It happens all the time. Think about, what we feed ourselves, what we feed our children. We make economic excuses for a lot of bad behavior. You could go vegan. You could go totally plant-based, but why not? Well, I don't like it. I don't want to. It's too expensive. It's difficult. Well, if it's difficult is too much to ask to make a good moral decision, then what can we ever hope for other people? Think about how often we try to make an excuse. I say we. I'm thinking probably more now about liberal people, or teachers tend to do this a lot, right? When someone commits a crime, someone makes some bad decisions, they get in some legal trouble. We say, yes, that we don't want the behavior. Yes, the person should be arrested, but let's consider the upbringing. Let's consider what led them to that situation. Think about how that person got there. Right? Oh, that person didn't go to a good school. That person didn't have this choice. That person didn't have this opportunity. And as a result, they made a bad decision. We still acknowledge it's a bad decision, but we recognize the context so that when we pass judgment, we don't pass judgment in ways that are final or unfairly harsh. We'll consider that those same situations can lead to people's political views. If somebody lives a life that sets them up to rob a bank or steal from their neighbor, and we're going to use that to assess the behavior, we're going to look at that act of theft, not in a vacuum, not in total isolation. We're going to put it into its context to understand how that person really thought, why they did what they did, and make a decision about how to rehabilitate them. Why don't we do the same thing when we're talking about students in our class, or we're talking about our angry political uncle at Thanksgiving? What has happened that led that person to see the world that way? And then use that context to understand and to help, right? Have the conversation that helps. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. And that means that as long as I'm hopeful that you can grow and you can improve and you can do better, I do not pass final judgment. Okay, this is super important for teachers thinking about students. And I'm talking, think about your least favorite students, the most troubled kids you have, or maybe they don't seem troubled, they're just causing you trouble. Remember that most behaviors are a form of communication. And remember that as soon as you pass judgment, you don't say that kid's acting like blank, you say that kid is blank. That means that's who that kid is in your mind now, and you have essentially given yourself permission to quit trying. That is unacceptable in the role of an educator, where your job is to empower and uplift individuals. When you do the same thing with family members, talking about politics or morals or current events, whatever it may be, and you don't say you're acting like, we just say you are blank, you are this. Well, that means that's who I think you are now. And if I don't like that label that I just attributed to you, then I can be done with you. I just gave myself the easy way out. I personally don't think that's a productive way to handle our relationships with people who are important, right? The people that we care about most, our friends, our family, maybe our close coworkers, etc. We need to do better than that. And so one of the things we need to do is avoid passing that final judgment and remember that there's probably a way that things can change and that maybe we just need to be a little patient and recognize that not everyone grows or learns at the same rate. We have to be understanding. We have to wait. We have to keep having that conversation. We have to keep sharing an article. We have to keep smiling and nodding through the dumb stuff. And then we respond and come, you need to do that without getting angry and without being aggressive, and trying to be offensive about it. If we can't have that discussion, if we're just going to pass the judgment, shut the door too fast, then one, I think we should remember that we're going to get very lonely very fast because no one is totally innocent. None of us are without guilt. I mean, go have a cheeseburger tonight and prove me right. Okay. But we also need to remember that we maybe don't want to be the kind of person that gives up hope on others too easily. So if you're a teacher and you think about how to deal with those troubling students, how do you get with, how do you handle the ones that say the rude things, that don't behave in class? Well, if you're serious about your job, you're serious about uplifting the individuals, then you have to remember that kid needs help just as much as everyone else in the room, maybe more. And so we need to give the time it takes for that progress to occur. If we're thinking about our family or our friends, we need to remember that those people are close to us for a reason, that we've been having holidays with those people for years for a good reason. And that if we think that person is valuable, that we love that person is worthy of whatever the world offers or whatever goodness we can give them, then we need to have the patience to wait, to see the growth occur. And we need to remember that it's our job to maintain hope. We need to help them see the person they can be or that how they can be right. Because if we give up on them, then maybe everyone else does too. We need to know that it is our job as good people to be patient, to try to help others. And we also have to remember that maybe sometimes we're wrong. And maybe sometimes we need others to be patient with us or forgiving with us. Now, as Nick Carraway says at the end of the passage that I read from Gatsby, there does come a limit. He says, and after boasting this way of my tolerance, I come to the admission that it has a limit. But I think that most of us would benefit by pushing those limits a little bit farther out into the future, by giving everyone a little more time to have a good talk, to share the right ideas and feelings, and to hope for good outcomes. But when somebody proves to you who they really are, believe them. Just make sure that you're not confusing a symptom, right, for an original cause. As we get through our first semester for what most people is distance learning or some form of hybrid learning, and as we prepare to have a Thanksgiving during a pandemic and after a tough election, there are a lot of things that are going to have a lot of people on edge. We all have a lot of things to be thinking about or angry about or worried about. And before you are too quick to pass judgment or to throw away a relationship that should matter to you, all I can say is that I hope you too will reserve judgments, because you can demonstrate nearly infinite hope. This has been the 48th episode of the ClassCast Podcast. I'm Ryan Tibbens. You can find the ClassCast Podcast on all major streaming services, including Apple Podcasts and iTunes, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify. We're now on Pandora, YouTube, and just about anywhere else that you can stream a podcast. You can also find this episode along with some related links and a quick summary at www.classcastpodcast.com. You can also reach me there if you have ideas or questions, anything that you'd like to add to this conversation. I hope that everyone has a very happy Thanksgiving, that we all find a few things that we can truly be grateful for despite difficult circumstances right now, and that the time off treats us all very well. I am infinitely hopeful for that. Thank you and have a good day.